Hello. Um, Waiting to see this populate on Twitter and Facebook. So give me a second. I'm adjusting things, including my glasses. If you see this, let me know if you can hear me. Sometimes my microphone can have problems. So I'm going to ask this group right now, my direct messaging group. Let me know if you all can hear me and see me. So I haven't gone live in a while. And one of the reasons I wanted to go live, my glasses are so crooked. One of the reasons I wanted to go live is because I didn't sleep last night. I couldn't sleep last night. The amount of voter suppression that's happening right now is it's really hard on my soul. It's really tough. Watching that representative get arrested yesterday, that was pretty tough as well. So I wanted to have a conversation about voting rights in this country. It won't be that long. I'll probably talk for 5 to 10 minutes, so hopefully you'll stick with me. As you all know, I became a voting rights advocate around 2013. Before then, I mostly focused on housing issues. Those who know me know why I focused on housing issues. Why are my glasses still crooked? There we go. Those of you who know me know I focused on housing issues because I had housing insecurity as a child, lived in storage facility. I've always worked on issues concerning homelessness. And then I changed to voting rights because I realized that no matter what I cared about, whether it was environmental issues, whether it was housing issues, whether it was healthcare issues, that all of that began at the ballot box. And guess who else knows that? Republicans do. Republicans know that everything begins at the ballot box. So this is why there is this amount of voter suppression that's happening right now. And they're doing it in a really bold way, in a way that we haven't seen since Jim Crow. I saw some people think that that's some sort of exaggeration, that we're saying that this is getting rolled back to Jim Crow time. That's not an exaggeration. The way that the Republicans are going about doing voter suppression right now, it harkens back really to right after Reconstruction. Okay, so this has been going on for a very long time in this country. Our country has never been a fully enfranchised country. Even after 1965 and the Voting Rights Act was passed, we still had people that were disenfranchised, meaning those who were incarcerated, and for some that became re-entered back into society after being incarcerated. Some of them didn't get their voting rights back. And we still have that as an issue in this country. And we saw that in Florida, that those that had been formerly incarcerated and re-entering back into society, that they had won their right to vote back, and then Republicans immediately pushed that back down. Okay? So we're seeing this cycle of oppression play out every single decade. So I became a voting rights activist in 2013 because that is when the Supreme Court of the United States, when SCOTUS gutted the Voting Rights Act. And it was really blatant. They used the excuse of Obama, or post-racial, to get rid of voting rights. And at that point, I thought, well, this is going to be bad. And none of us knew just how bad. Well, that's not true. John Lewis and people who had long fought for voting rights did know. But I would say there was a vast majority of us that just didn't know how bad it was going to be. So I kind of want to give you just a quick overview on how long we have all been fighting for voting rights and what is this really about. This is really about Republicans, alt-right, right-winged, however they want to term themselves. This is about them creating and sustaining a white power structure. I want us to all be very clear about that. I gave a voting rights lecture to a woman, a white woman, middle-aged, who was like, they don't really use racist language when they're doing this. They're saying that this is about voter integrity. And I said, Republicans have been using race-neutral language for decades to take away voting rights. You don't have to say a discriminatory word to look at the discriminatory intent. What is the intent of the measures that they are passing? Well, the intent is to keep BIPOC voters, disabled voters, trans voters from voting. You can see I'm starting to get mad. I am mad. I am mad. I didn't sleep. So can I just give you all just a quick overview? And I just want to say this real fast. I love that Sherilyn Ifill said this of the LDF NAACP. You can barely see it, but it says, make no mistake, this bill, and she was talking about an older voter suppression bill, this bill is old poison in a new bottle. Do you see, Republicans are very good at repackaging voter suppression. They've been doing it since after Reconstruction. When Black men came into power and were elected to Congress, it was white people during that time that were in Congress were frustrated by their success. They were frustrated that they were helping our communities, they were crafting laws, they were successful. They immediately had to dismantle the idea that Black people could be successful in this country, okay? So it started a long time ago. So let me just jump to that really quickly. So I want to show you, I'm not going to read all these, I'm just going to give you a little quick overview. I want to show you how long it's taken for us to get voter suppression, to push back voter suppression, okay? It's taken us a long time. In 1865, the 13th Amendment, it comes to being, it abolishes slavery. And it takes another year for the Civil Rights Act, the first one in 1866 to get passed. This is a Civil Rights Act that was pretty toothless. And that's why we needed another one to be passed almost 100 years later in 1964. A couple years later, the 14th Amendment was passed. This is granting citizenship to those born in U.S. soil, and that is including many that have been enslaved, including my relatives, right? And then after that, the 15th Amendment is ratified. Black men, not women, but Black men gain the right to vote. So you see that after, it takes at least 5 years after slavery for us to even get the right, to get some of us to get the right to vote, okay, outside of white land-owning men. Reconstruction is a short amount of time, 1863 to 1877, 1,500 African-American office holders during that time period, very successful, helped pass legislation that helped bring in public schooling. This is exciting. And then, boom, Jim Crow starts right away. And people, that's why when we're talking about these voter suppression bills being very similar to Jim Crow, it's because of the same thing. We see that we had success in electing Warnock. We see that Black voters turned out, well, we always turn out, but turned out at the highest level to get Joe Biden into office and to get us to keep the House and to win the Senate. And what do Republicans do? They do exactly what happened during Reconstruction. They freak out. And they need a big lie, just like they did with Trump, to start taking away our voting rights again. So they immediately start instilling things called the Mississippi Plan. The Mississippi Plan was pretty bold and belated, saying, hey, we're doing this for white supremacy. They had it in there. It says it in their constitution. This is for white supremacy. Okay. But then we put it in the grandfather clause. And if you don't know what the grandfather clause is, it's saying, listen, you can vote if your grandfather was able to vote. Well, whose grandfathers weren't able to vote during that time? If you were enslaved, your grandfather couldn't vote. So that means you got pushed out. Then you had poll taxes, literal money. You might have owed someone money. If you owed money, you couldn't vote. And then we have literacy tests. And if you've ever looked at the history of these literacy tests, lawyers today couldn't pass them. They made them complicated and not only complicated, nonsensical. Okay, so they made it impossible. So then we have, of course, the 19th Amendment, white women are able to vote, 1924, granting Indians Native American citizenship. Doesn't automatically guarantee the right to vote for Native Americans, but we're starting to move in that direction. Then we have the murder of Emmett Till, the Civil Rights Act of 1957, they call it the paper tiger. It still didn't prevent voter suppression happening. Then Medgar Evers was murdered. He was a civil rights activist. You start seeing now the desperation that's going on with white supremacy. You're starting to see things moving forward and they're progressing, and there's a desperation there. It's happening with the CIA, it's happening with the FBI, it's happening with our president. Nixon was notorious about not caring what happened to civil rights leaders. I want you to know that there were Black women that were murdered during this time period too, and I'm going to do another live event discussing that. But Medgar Evers was murdered. And then at that time, you have the murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, who were out registering voters in the South. They were murdered because they were just trying to get people on the ballot. Do you understand the insidious nature? It's violent. It's violent literally, and it's still violent because it's trying to keep us out of having a say in our representation, in our public policy, and in our laws. Someone says hi there. Hi. So that's what the intent as well. It's not just to keep a white power structure. It is, and they're doing it in a way that tells you, listen, we don't want you to have a say in your power in this power structure. We don't want you to say in your representation. We don't want you to have a say in public policy. We don't want you to have a say in your law. That is what's happening, and we need to be very blunt about what's going on. So then it's at that time that we have the Civil Rights Act passed, and we have the March on Selma. And of course, we know what happens then. There's a ton of violence after that. So what I'm saying is we've had a long history in pushing for voting rights. And we have a long history in our country of violence towards Black bodies, towards BIPOC bodies, that are just wanting what was promised in this country, which is that we would all have a say. One person, one vote. You should read Dr. Carol Anderson's book. It's very, very good. So right now, what's happening is the same as what has always been happening. You know, my husband was getting really frustrated. He was saying, you know, I'm frustrated with Joe Manchin because he's not trying to help us pass voting rights. And I know some people have said, well, we shouldn't just blame Joe Manchin, we should blame the Republicans. Of course we should blame the Republicans, but the Republicans are gone. They're not a party anymore. I mean, they are, but they don't stand for anything except oppression. They don't. They don't. The Republican Party stands for the white power structure, and that is all. And it sounds like an exaggeration. I mean, how even me saying those words, I mean, doesn't that just sound so radical? But that's what they're doing. You don't hear all of these Republicans today dismissing or saying what happened in Georgia is a bad thing. Do you hear any of our congressional representatives saying that loudly? Of course not. They're staying out of it. Okay? So that means we have to focus on our party, on the Democrats, and what the Democrats' response are doing. I get that Joe Manchin is a blue dog Democrat, and part of me is like this idea that he wants to create compromise somehow with the Republicans. I mean, to me, this is nonsensical. That Republican Party is not interested in compromise, not even a little bit, because they know if they compromise, even an inch, even a pinky's worth of compromise, that might look bad to their base. That if any success for a Democrat to them is something that is bad for them come election time. So that means we have to focus on putting on the pressure on people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. I wish that we could put pressure on Republicans. They're gone. That party doesn't stand for anything. Honestly, we're at this point, they just stand for white supremacy, white power structures. That's all that they're standing for right now. And we also have to put pressure on corporations. Corporations that are willing to fund these bills, fund these representatives that are putting together these 240 plus voter suppression bills across the country. So I just had to quickly say that. I appreciate you who tuned in and watched today. I'll continue to talk about it. I'll leave you with this. America has been considered a flawed democracy now for a few years in a row by the Economist Intelligence Unit. They rate countries right now to see which one's a flawed democracy or a broken democracy. We are a flawed democracy. And Republicans should not think of voting rights as a partisan issue. The fact that they do, and that they have gone out of their way to do voter suppression. Let me leave you with this. There was another person His name was Thomas Hoffler. And he said, I'm going to move out of the way. It says, usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters. Okay? It's very clear here what their intent is. That Thomas Hoffler was a guy who was he was the king of partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. He went out of his way to make sure that black voters' vote was diluted, that their power was less, that Republicans always had a majority, even if a majority of Democrats voted. It's painful, and it's painful to me, and I hope that it's painful for you all, and I will leave you with this. No matter what policies you care about, if you want health care for everyone, whether it's Medicaid for all, or you believe in the crafting of the New Deal, it's not full legislation yet, but if you believe in that, you want to get to net zero. Who doesn't want to get to net carbon zero, except for Republicans? Then you're going to care about voting rights too. And we can tweet about it, and that's good, but we also need to be calling representatives. And for example, I have T-Mobile today. T-Mobile spent money on voter suppression efforts in Georgia. I will be calling T-Mobile today and saying, I've been a long-time customer. Why are you doing this? How are you doing this? Okay? So we have to do more than that. We also need to be calling out media that is making voting rights seem like it has two sides, two valid sides. There are not two valid sides of voting rights. There are not two sides of voting rights, two valid sides. There is, you either want every eligible American to have voting rights. And eligible, I mean 18 years old or and a citizen of the United States. You either want that, or you don't. Do you see what I'm saying? There are not two sides to voting rights. You either want a full enfranchised democracy, or you're anti-democratic, you're anti-democracy. So please call out the press. Please do me a favor, call out the press. Every single time, they're just like, whoa, I think there's two sides to this story. There are not. And they need to stop writing about it like this. Because by the way, when democracy falls apart, the press is going to be one of the first things that goes. They're going to be replaced by state media, like Fox News. That will be all of our news. Do you see what I'm saying? So it behooves the media to really understand this and understand that this shouldn't be considered a partisan issue. Okay? All right, I'll leave you with that. I have a bunch of meetings today, and I'm so tired. Do you see how big my bags are? Because I did not sleep last night. If there is another live video you want me to do about Georgia or the other bills in the House, please let me know. I'd be happy. Oh, thank you. I'd be happy to talk about any of those bills. You can leave me a comment below, share the broadcast, and I'll be doing more of these because 2022 election cycle, that was starting to happen already. It has to be about voting rights. It has to be about voting rights and everything else. We can't just talk about one thing. It has to be about everything else, but it's all attached to voting rights. I want you all to see that everything you care about is attached to voting rights. If we can't have access to the ballot box, we cannot pick our representatives. They're picking us, okay? And if you care about housing, about homeless issues, about affordable housing, about health care, about child care, about education, about student loans, about student debt, about debt, all of it is attached to voting rights, okay? That's it. Love you all. Have love for you all. As Bell Hooks once said to me, with you all in struggle. She said, with you in struggle.